Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Kelly Rankin, and he's going to talk about optimizing for fulfilled mob practices, continuous learning, and holistic perspective in the work. So before we get onto those topics, Kelly, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into mobbing and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I've been mobbing for about 7 or 8 years. Really passionate about it. Once I started mobbing, I've basically done almost that alone the entire time afterwards. So, yeah.
Nice. Very cool. So what what are your thoughts on optimizing for fulfilled mob practices? What are you thinking there?
So, when I got in, when I first heard about mobbing, I actually said I didn't want to do it. I had a manager named Melanie that had brought up the idea, and I had never heard of it before. And my first reaction was sort of to be intimidated. Like, I feel like we're going to have more experienced engineers basically telling us what to do all the time and standing over our shoulder and not really letting us sort of experiment and figure out things the way that you do, especially as a newer developer, but, as any developer, essentially. And so about a year later, I saw the Woody Zool video talking about like a day in mobbing, basically, and really liked the idea. It looked interesting to me, and so I brought that to the team and showed it at sort of we had like a weekly learning session where we'd like watch a video or something. Yeah, and so got a subset of the team to agree to mob, and then we just kind of been doing it ever since then.
What got you past the not wanting to do it? Was it just the video, or was there a conversation you had? Like, how did you get from I don't want to do it to I'll try it?
It's sort of a combination of the video helped because it puts a sort of visual in your mind of what is this experience actually like. So it's not just this abstraction of my imagination so much. But also I had a couple coworkers that I trusted quite a bit that I had worked with for a number of years. And so that made it a little bit easier too. Like, I knew what to expect from them. We had already, started to teach each other a lot of things, and you didn't have to be too afraid that they're gonna be like, oh, this person doesn't know, doesn't know their stuff. So that, yeah, probably those two things.
Okay, cool. Nice. And I guess when you had that first experience, what was that like? And then maybe how does that lead into being fulfilled as a mob participant?
Yeah. So it kind of ties back to that whole everybody comes in with different motivations, somewhat different motivations, at least, about what do they want to get out of software development. And so kind of working with this group of people and slowly improving our mob and working through the difficulties that came up over time. We'd have a lot of different disputes that would come up about oh, I want to use this particular library to try to solve this problem, or something like that, or I want to use a new feature on Azure that we've never used before, and having a mix of experience levels with different concerns. Just sort of going through that on a daily basis, we started to slowly realize you need to really care about what each person needs in the situation, essentially, and let them pursue that in different ways, one way or another. So
yeah, and I guess that kind of goes back to what you originally said with your original fear of a mob programming is it'll just be one dominant person kind of forcing whatever his or her agenda is. And I also want to note, it's really cool to have someone on the show who says, how long have you been mobbing for? And it's 7 or 8 years, because it's usually for most
Yeah, that's
people.
amazing, right?
Yeah. For most people, it's usually a smaller number. And it reminds me of something that Chris said to someone we had on the show before, Aaron Griffith. What did you called him? The most experienced mobber, you know?
Yeah. He's got 11 years of mobbing under his belt.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah. So no, that's great. And so I guess kind of stemming from that, because I think that is a key part of fulfillment, is the ability to express yourself, whether it's run an experiment or share an idea. At least for me, the ability, or at least influence someone else's idea or the team's idea. What are things that you've tried or that you use to kind of help a team that's in the middle of a disagreement and potentially at a loss of fulfillment when they have to do it all together, right?
Yeah. I'd say as more time goes on, I'm a lot more willing to let other people try their ideas before mine, first of all, because I've already kind of been there and done that. So it's not as important. I have to get my thing on the table. So that's one big one, knowing when to defer. Just also trying multiple options. You can go partway down the path in 3 different directions and then evaluate from there, so experimentation. We get into these sort of there's locked in, we're debating, we got to do this or we got to do this. And that's, in reality, we can experiment with multiple ideas. So just moving away from this, we have to decide right away what we're going to do. In most cases, we don't need to do that. So that's a big
Woody would always say, wait until the last responsible moment to make a decision. I think that comes from the Lean software book. And so, yeah, I think that mentality is, everybody wants to think of everything up front. It's very counterintuitive, but the benefit of pushing back a decision a long time, one, I think it's more natural in a mob. And then also I think that it provides a lot of value. So very cool.
Yeah, and I think maybe to dovetail a little bit from this topic, but I think it's key to it, because I've noticed that I've seen it on discussions on social media, and then also just discussing with others. I think there's an embedded skill there to do this as a mob effectively that sometimes might be just stated almost as magic, oh, let's let everyone try their ideas. Where in some people's minds, someone's idea is a 6-month project, right?
Right.
Right. And so I think I'm starting to realize that successful, fulfilled mobbing, it's a necessary skill to take any big, even audacious idea and break it down into a very tiny, safe experiment, right? Because without that, you'd be waiting 6 months for someone to finish their idea, right? If it's a gigantic thing. What have you seen to help take someone's idea and turn it into something that's actionable for a mob and keep their attention span?
I mean, personally, the way I kind of like to do it, say it's a new technology, you want to adopt a new technology, is just to watch maybe a video, kind of go through, try to find a high quality video that the group can watch and start to just get a little bit more information about what is this thing actually, because when it's an abstraction, you don't know, depending on your level of experience with that topic, you don't know how long it's actually going to take, but to do a particular thing, or how much you need to learn. But sometimes, you might be really opposed to something, and then when you actually walk partway down the path, you're oh, this seems it's going to be really smooth.
Yeah.
And it's actually not that big of a deal, but I was intimidated by it for whatever reason, or I was fixated on my idea. And in reality, this other person's idea is actually pretty good. So
nice. Yeah. And actually, we just kind of did that recently in our mob, where it's almost like a test of the technology or practices community and accessibility, is to let's try to find a video and watch something on it. That was a good one you said. Or what we do too is just find the first Google result for a tutorial and see if it even works. Because it's amazing how many times, we were doing it the other day, we're well, we're having this problem. What if we just, started it from scratch and see how, and it's amazing how many technologies just don't even work doing the 101 tutorial.
Right.
And versus other ones where everything's just blazing and everything's working.
One of my one of my most popular blogs. So I have a website. It's about a completely different topic, and I wrote one blog post about this esoteric bug in SQL Server, and it is my number one post and still gets regular hits like today, because it was just something that I found like completely out of nowhere. And it was because all the tutorials don't actually work except for this one blog. And so yeah, it's just a funny thing. Funny
Yeah, no, it's like a huge sense of relief for people who are stuck on something when they find that like magical tutorial or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, Chris. So I know this is a topic that's been on our Kanban for a while, and we've maybe addressed it or not, but I know what are some of the challenges or questions I know you've been asked directly, Chris, about, like, is it just people are like, how am I possibly fulfilled in a mob when I'm so used to working solo? Like, maybe you can expand on some of those questions.
You're talking about like the solo versus mob personal fulfillment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So a question that I've seen often is, if I'm used to working solo, how do I feel fulfilled with my work? Because usually the users using something I've created by myself is my personal feeling of fulfillment. And I wrote a whole blog on this, but this was kind of my answer to the person was, now rather than that code being the deliverable that you feel fulfilled about, your product is almost the team and how well the team does together. So your contributions toward retrospectives, your obviously contributions toward the code, but it's more of like, have we been delivering better today than we were yesterday based on a contribution that I made to the team? These are kind of like permanent multipliers that you introduce into the team's productivity. Like, that's where I think a lot of the personal fulfillment comes from in mobbing. It's like, hey, look, the team's behaving that way because I had a great idea and they adopted it, and it works really well. And I think that those sorts of things kind of go around the group. I don't know, Kelly, if you feel the same way or anything, but that was maybe my thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, I share a lot of that opinion. Also, I think it's wise to let people pursue the things that they really feel ambitious about. And if that means that's something that they do on their own for a little while and then bring it to the group, that's okay too. Just really not making people feel like they're restricted any more than necessary, I think, is key. Like, we, in my probably favorite mob, like most high powered mob, I'd say, like, we were all innovating pretty frequently, where we all kind of had something on the back burner that we were trying, and then we'd bring it to the group, partway through, and then they'd make some comments like, I don't know, I kind of like this, but I don't like this. And then how about I help you look at that? And then, you start to get that adoption of that particular idea. And that feels really good to get the validation of, like, I tried this thing and people liked it and they helped augment it to make it even better. So yeah, that cycle works pretty well.
Yeah.
I think I can second that some really good mobs I've been in are ensembles where people are experimenting on the side, whether it's like during learning time, or they're like, hey, I'm gonna go try something, I'll be right back, or take me out of the driver rotation, whether they stay in the call or not. But I've seen that expression of autonomy be very healthy, almost cathartic, right? Like, if you really want to try a thing and you feel like you'd be interrupting the flow to try a thing, just go try the thing.
Right.
And I think some people see it as a mob anti-pattern. I suppose it can be, but I think it kind of goes back to kind of a bedrock thing for me. And I think it's a priority for a lot of people in the tech industry, but it makes a big difference how much of a priority it is, like how much you favor autonomy almost over anything else. And for me, it's really, really, really high. And I think it has a big tie-in with fulfillment, because if someone's participating in a mob, or let's say, this new practice you want to do, or whatever the thing is, because they feel pressure, whether it's peer pressure or, boss pressure or whatever it is, me and my wife were actually talking about it this morning. It's kind of like forcing someone into a restaurant and they're coming in frustrated and negative. the chances of them liking the food, no matter how good it is, are probably pretty low, right? And so for me, fulfillment has a lot to do with autonomy. So I almost, it's unless you're breaking bedrock morality of some kind or a policy, it's usually good not to step on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the thing being, like, if you have a pretty healthy mob, you're working together for most of the time, and even when you do sort of step away, you kind of have the spirit of the mob. Like there's this, essence, shall we say, that you kind of understand what the concerns are going to be of other people, and you're keeping that in mind the whole time. Essentially of like, okay, I want to break away and try this thing, but I know that I have a lot of respect for these people that I'm working with. So when I bring it to them, I need to honor their concerns and be ready to adapt. So that's the risk you take. So
all right, well, maybe it's a good time to kind of jump on over to continuous learning. So what are your thoughts? I know I'm very passionate about this topic.
So it can mean different things depending on where you are in your career, sort of like what's a priority to focus on as far as continuous learning goes. So if somebody is like, say, pretty new to programming and they've just joined the team, you're going to emphasize probably a somewhat different set of learning for that person as opposed to the people who have some more experience. But also those people who have more experience also need a lot of learning too. It's easy to, become stagnant or to approach what you're doing in sort of a haphazard way, where you're sort of stumbling through and you get it to work and it sort of works, but there's a lot of problems that come up later. And just realizing that, if you take a step back and formally try to learn things along the way, that it makes a huge difference. We've had a lot of teams like that where everybody sort of thinks they know what they're doing, but then taking a step back and really doing focused learnings makes a big difference.
Nice.
Are there any kind of big revelations that have come out from that, or I guess what made you go from, what was the transition there? Like, what solidified your thinking in this area? Was there like an experience or something that comes to mind?
Off the top of my head, lots of little things. So just even in something that you do frequently, if you go back over even the fundamentals, you'll have a new insight almost every time, essentially. So, a lot of people sort of pride themselves on like, I can sit behind the keyboard, I can just crank this out, I don't need to look at anything. But like, you don't know what you're not aware of in that process. So you might be missing some really good tools that you could use. So
yeah, I've seen that too, that like you said, going over the fundamentals, even if you feel you are an expert in something, can often be fruitful, because if you're paying attention, you might be like, there's 5 points or 5 things, you're like, oh, those first 4, like I totally got down. And that actually was the case for me. I was listening to or watching a unit testing series in Python, and like 3 or 4 of the main like sections were like pretty much review for me, but then there was this 5th section that was just like a whole new world. I'm like, I would have never expected to discover something like that in kind of like a 101 type of video series. And that also happened to me in another technology too, where a tool or something that is just a huge innovation leap forward as far as feedback used in this technology. It's like, oh, I had no idea about this when we manually been clicking through something.
Well, also I think teaching, I'll just jump in real quick. When I find myself like when I'm teaching somebody something, and then I'll be like, I don't do this as often as I should, and then I'm like, okay, yeah, like that's a reminder. I should probably be doing that. So like even just a reminder to yourself of something you already know can be really good. No one gets it right all the time.
Yeah, or they hit you with a question that shakes your comprehension of the topic, where you're like, oh, I actually don't understand how this works exactly. I thought I did, but I actually don't. That happens a lot.
Yeah, so I think that's really healthy anyway, finding those moments too, because anybody that looks up to you as a mentor is going to appreciate seeing that you don't know something sometimes as well, and that you're continuing on your learning journey, or things like, I'm not really good at this, but this is my understanding right now of it. And, so those things can be really, just provide safety, I guess. Right.
Yeah. And to jump in here with the question, it's actually kind of going off of a tweet that came up recently. Someone was basically saying, and I think it would apply to learning too, that the desire to learn is like 90% of the battle. Like once you get started and you got some habits with learning, you'll figure it out, basically. But I don't know, what have you seen help people start their continuous learning journey, right? As opposed to the kind of like static set of skills, and this is what I pump out every day to earn a paycheck kind of thing. And I know that's a very stereotypical way to put it, but just saying one end of the spectrum versus kind of jumping, or at least starting their journey towards I'm learning while I'm working, or something like that.
I mean, it's kind of a basic answer, but mobbing for one, just working directly with multiple other people who have different skill sets or different experiences, prompts all kinds of learning, essentially. Even if somebody's not a formal member of the mob, I like to just, have an open invitation and sort of tell people, if you want to, we're going to do a learning on such and such topic, if you want to hop in. I've had a lot of people want to stay with the mob because of those kinds of experiences where there's like, wow, like a supportive learning environment. They get a lot of bonus content from the experienced people about, that they wouldn't necessarily pick up on their own. And so I've had a lot of people like with full stack development, I feel like opened a lot of eyes there where, I've been working on the front end or back end for most of my career, and I was really afraid of the other one. But now that you're showing me a TDD comparison, it's actually basically the same thing in a lot of ways. The like Angular versus Ruby or C#, conceptually, it's basically the same in a lot of ways with the general work that you're doing. So
nice. Yeah, I would definitely second that, because I think at least for many people, interacting with others is inspiring. Even if it's just like you go to a meetup and someone starts sharing on an idea, it's a pretty easy thing to hear something that's interesting to start learning about it, right? And so where sometimes just looking at a textbook doesn't inspire a whole lot of learning, where if someone else is already in the act of learning or sharing, joining them is an easier step, I guess. Going to like the habits make it easy, right? If it's easier to just show up at a meetup or just show up at a session, it might make the next steps easier to pick up learning something else. And I guess on the tail end of that question, what helps keep your continuous learning going as opposed to being an event happening here and there?
So, I mean, in my most recent mob, we use William Larson introduced me to this continuous improvement canvas idea. And I don't think that he realized how much we were going to use it even. But it's a sort of something that we visited at the beginning and the end of the day, and really kept tabs on like, how are things going? Does anybody want to, like, whether it's a learning session, is it a sort of mob etiquette issue where somebody's not feeling good about how things are going? Documentation, sort of like stuff that we really want to save that there's no, other place where it's stored. So just having something where you're coming back to it over and over again, it definitely helps, but you still need the passion. You need people that are like excited to go through that process to some degree. So you do have to spark that. But
very cool. I think at one point I was mobbing with Willem in the past, and he had introduced, and this was in person, so he had introduced the Safari retrospective, which was like the flower, the elephant foot, and it's like, do you feel stepped on, sort of thing. And people put out these anonymous cards, but it was like a very regular thing, and it worked out some pretty interesting stuff within teams. So yeah, I'm always kind of interested to see the things that he suggests for teams and stuff.
Yeah, I think something that I learned from Willem and that team is that bringing people in who are not always a part of the mob and having them help to facilitate some of the conversations really will change the conversation.
Yeah.
In surprising ways, where people say things they never say, and you realize there's a new issue to work on. So that's a big one too.
Awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I wanted to revisit to what would you call it, the continuous improvement canvas?
Yep.
Is it basically like a board of virtual stickies with different categories? I think
yeah. So in his in the article that he shared with me in the original Inception, it's sort of like this 4-quadrant thing where you move sort of an idea from, there's a beginning phase, and then it, you know, you go through to the different steps of like, maybe we'll do this, to yes, we'd like to try it, to, you know, here's a norm that we're trying to codify, and then there's like a history column. Ours was a Trello board, and it had more columns than that, so you can kind of morph into different styles.
Was this for adoption of working agreements? Was that?
Yeah, exactly. And just also keeping track of learning and stuff like that too, sort of like, so those combined uses there. And in our something that was kind of interesting about that, our last column was sort of like, we wrote more fleshed out thoughts about what we found from that idea that we originated. And sometimes it turned into like a mob value kind of thing. And we'd elaborate on that. And then a newcomer could come in and sort of read through that and get like a really good idea of what the mob culture is and whether or not they're interested in those, you know, does it resonate with them or not? So.
Yeah. And what's connecting for me, Chris recently sent our teams a video on second brain type stuff. And how it can help with learning. And I almost wonder, it almost seems like there's like this thing that happens a lot with mobs. And I think this continuous improvement canvas is one where it's like the mob forms their collective second brain, you know, and it helps their learning and experimentation, right? Because if you're learning something and you want to see, like in the one you were talking about, how it progresses through time as through the different stages, it's hard to keep all that in your head. It's also kind of stressful to keep that in your head, right? So to have the second brain to offload it onto and then revisit kind of catches you up, right? So you can move to the next phase, so to speak. That's I don't know. Was that part of any of the material, Chris? The collective aspect of a second brain? I don't know. It's almost always framed in like a solo perspective from what I've seen.
Yeah. Well, so that is specifically, forget his name now, but Second Brain was written by the book's author. But then there's a lot of technology that's been evolving out of it. You know, things like Obsidian and Eagle and things. Jason Story, who we've had on the show before, talked pretty deeply in as far as how he manages his own on his YouTube channel. But right now we have people, you know, so I had forwarded that video. Vince was the one that had given it to me because he's very passionate about it and has been kind of promoting that within all of the mobs that we have. And so, but I think it is kind of a natural thing where it's like, okay, you know, how do you store the collective knowledge of the team, especially after you have team members? And I think this goes back to my thought of the team is the Ship of Theseus, right? So in the Ship of Theseus and Greek mythology, it's like, you know, if you have the ship and every plank of wood is gradually replaced on the ship for repairs and regular maintenance over the course of years, and you know, the ship at the beginning is now made of completely different physical pieces of wood than at the end, but it was one piece of wood, then another. So, you know, was it always the same ship? And my argument is that, you know, most people will always come into a team and that the product they're working on is probably decades old at this point. You know, it's very rare that you work on something greenfield, and most greenfield projects are actually a bad idea because they're usually a full rewrite of something that could be iterated on. And so so I do talk about like, so the team is the Ship of Theseus, and I think that there was a big shift in the way that the team was thinking about the product and how they were working on it, because I think a lot of the second brain stuff may have stemmed out of a little bit of the transition of thinking of like, we are the team, we are the product, to maybe I'm a plank of wood in this transitioning ship. And so I think that sort of stuff, especially in a mob, that becomes much more relevant. And then when you're doing chaos engineering for the team, like if you're swapping people out that become too knowledgeable in the product, then you'll see a lot more of this, because it's like, how do I help the next person that's going to work on this be successful?
Yeah, that was a big part of it too, was sort of that was another use of that, was keeping track of information. If I'm not here tomorrow, what will the mob that exists need to succeed? Essentially, so promoted saving information that we wouldn't have otherwise. So.
Don't let the ship sink while you've been replaced or something. I don't know.
Yes.
And so really good stuff. This might be a good transition point for the holistic perspective in the work. So maybe what were you thinking there?
So I'm pretty big into full stack development. When I look for employment, I look for a job where I can be involved with many parts of the process, and also interface with other people who have responsibilities, that are very different from mine. Basically what I find is that the teams can get in sort of these bubbles where they're just working and working and working and working and, quote unquote, producing something, but not really understanding like what's actually needed, or even what the intent is, whether that's what the customers need or leadership team's vision, or, whatever thing you're pursuing. Sort of like, it's really easy to just, produce something that's not actually particularly of use, essentially. So.
And are there any maybe examples that you can contrast between, working one way or the other, or how did you come to this line of thinking?
So probably there's different layers to it. So I guess I'll say, from working with people in different departments, say you work at a company that has like 10 different departments and they have specialized areas. Inviting those people into your group and actually having conversations like while you're developing, not just upfront, but like actually during the process, and really talking about like what their job is like and what the concerns are. I just, you get to a point where, say, like, we're writing some particular business logic and we just happen to have the right person at the room at the right time. And all of a sudden, somebody says, oh, I'm going to make it do this, or, you should make it do this if you're doing like a navigator kind of thing. And then that person pops in and says, well, actually, there's this other concern around that area. And none of us had that particular piece of domain knowledge, but because we had them there with us, it completely changes the output, essentially. So
I can't tell you how many times I've been in a mob and it's just like one person had this, kind of bit of crucial knowledge that happened to be there that completely redirected the path forward. And had we not been mobbing, it would have been a full release cycle before we realized the problem.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting, and I think that's a big piece of, like, when people are evaluating mobbing for the first time and trying to figure out the financial benefits, that's such a hidden thing, but it's incredibly valuable. That it minimizes waste in so many ways. So I've seen that quite a bit.
And I'll add, it can even be an emotion, not even a piece of information, but just like immediate feedback on what you're doing. Like, this happened to us earlier today, where it's like, okay, yesterday was pretty painful. We tried 10 experiments, they all failed. Do we go for number 11 or 12? And we started listing out those options. And you could just feel it in the mob that this was not feeling like a good path for. And even just that feedback, just a facial expression or, I don't know, led to, okay, well, what's another way to do it? And how can you approach it from a completely different angle? Where if it was just me, like, oh, no big deal, I'll just plow through it and just keep going through the mess, I probably would have been okay with it. Where feeling that immediate feedback can lead to an innovation where you're like, let's not put up with this mess. Let's do something else, to fix this problem. Another recent experience, really, I want to emphasize what you said with full stack versus not. I've recently seen that, there's like two models in my mind, a team, a mob, or whatever. One that has complete authority and control over the full tech stack, all the way from ideation to delivery. And man, that machine can really move quickly. As soon as you introduce one piece that they can't touch, what starts being there? There's queues, there's waiting, there's all these things. And so, have you, like, what are some concrete examples you've seen? Because it sounds like you've been there. I'm guessing there's some reasons why you're a believer in full stack.
So I will say my initial experience, my early experiences in my career were in environments where I had the ability to contribute to a lot of different things.
Nice.
And then when that was taken away from me, that's when I really realized, I was like, wow, feels really ineffective to me. People talk about the concept of full stack development, and is there really a full stack developer? Like, can you possibly know everything? And I'd say no, I don't know everything, but I can know quite a bit about a lot of things. And so, if I'm working on the back end and I know how the front end is designed and how it works and what the concerns are, then I can keep that in mind while I'm doing it, and vice versa. Or if I'm working, with the database, if I have a particular piece of knowledge, I'll know how to design that in a certain way. So what I find is, like a pretty recent one was, we were working on a front end component, and it needed to communicate with Azure. And so there was some front end, back end interaction. And we basically found that, the infrastructure was not configured to support what was being asked to be done. And nobody had kept track of that. There was no ticket or item to be able to do that. So you kind of just naturally uncover things, before getting to production. Otherwise, we would have tried to launch it and then basically, it just wouldn't work. We'd have got an error. So.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good find. And I think I really love what you said, is that you can't know it all. You can't keep the full stack in your head. And I don't know if Google does this to me, just because like whatever I'm searching or looking up or whatever, like it's tracing from everything I type in, it usually tries to find like almost like counter arguments, so like DevOps is a search that will come up on fairly often for me or something. And I'll get like, it'll show me web pages of why DevOps doesn't work or why DevOps is terrible or whatever. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's like peppering me with all this stuff. But what I found by it, I actually clicked on one of them. It got me. I fell for it. It was basically people stressed out because they're one person trying to have all of ops and all of dev and all of front end and all of back end all in one person's head. And I was just thinking, well, yeah, that would be pretty terrible, right? And so I think full stack could sound crazy scary if you're trying to do it all alone, right? And be your own QA as well at the same time. And so I think maybe like there's a natural synergy with TDD and mobbing. Maybe there's a natural synergy with full stack and DevOps with mobbing, because you don't have to keep it all in your head and you can do it safely and step by step. And you can have those discoveries you just shared about, as opposed to finding them out way later.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to the fulfillment topic that we were originally talking about, where if you have people with these different skills and they have that opportunity to share it with the rest of the team, like that's pretty fulfilling. to be able to solve that problem for the team. Like, oh, everybody knows a little bit of CSS, but this person's like really adept at CSS. And now they're able to propagate that to the team. And no, we're not going to be brought up exactly to their level right away, but we'll get a lot closer pretty quickly. So.
Yeah, and so one thing, I was really struggling with specialty titles within a group before, and so when we were hiring DevOps engineers and database specialists and things like that, a lot of it was like, okay, well, they'll come into an environment with mobbing, and then they'll kind of want to go and work on their own. And what kind of naturally happened, from these specialists was, no, I prefer mobbing because we get a lot more done, and I'll just mob with a team. So a title for me these days is now just what they're going to focus their learning on, right? So it's full stack development. They're going to work in the software engineering discipline on some level because they're going to be part of the mob, but we're really working on single piece flow to production. But the nice thing is that a specialist can go deep on a specific skill set and then be present for the mob and learn those general skills just through the osmosis of being in the mob. But their learning track is just wildly different from everybody else, from the software engineer learning track. And if you get people on these specific learning tracks in different areas and then go back into mob with the team, then you get some really different things coming out of it. So.
Right.
Yeah, and that ties right back into fulfillment, right? Because if you have a deep learning track that when you walk into a team or mob, you have something to contribute, that brings fulfillment, right? So I really like that. So but we are coming up on time. Is there anything you like to share or plug, Kelly, before we close the show?
No, nothing in particular. I guess just if anybody's interested in mobbing and wants to have a mobbing experience, you can reach out to me on Twitter. I think it's Kelly Rankin 19. I'm always open to just do that if you want to do code katas or anything like that. So awesome, great. Yeah, and that can definitely inspire some learning and fulfillment and some holistic perspective. So if you have any opinions on those topics, audience, we'd love to hear it, whether it's comments in YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. We'd love to hear your perspective. Please share this with anybody who you feel like starting a conversation with on these things to kind of maybe get it going. And until next time, like, subscribe, mob well, and have a good one, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, everybody.